Hong Kong, a freelance reporter with Reuters, and contributor and verified journalist on HAPS. Thank you so much for joining me today, Almond.
Thanks for having me, Pete. Yeah.
It's an absolute pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your career trajectory. I know you have a degree from USC, from the Annenberg School. Tell
hmm
me about how you first got into journalism.
Ooh, that's a very cliche story, honestly. I actually didn't start out my bachelor degree with journalism. I was doing social sciences, and I think I spent like the good 2 or 3 years of trying to figure out like what I actually want to do. And then at that time, I had a boyfriend who really wants to do journalism, and I thought like, oh, maybe I could try like take some journalism courses, try to have some common topics or whatever. Um, and then once I started, I was like, oh, that's actually pretty fun. Um, so I ended up like minoring in journalism. But when I graduated from college, I just thought like, oh, I do want to get into into the industry, but I felt like my minor wasn't really enough, or like I don't have a very good foundation. Um, in journalism. So I just thought, oh, I guess I'll just go get a master's in journalism. And that's, like you said, that's what I get from USC Annenberg School.
Oh, oh,
Uh-oh. I think I might have lost Pete for a good 30 seconds. Oops. I guess I'm taking over then. Oh, well. Hi, Lucia. So great to see you and hear from you.
oh,
Oh,
Almond,
hi,
are
Pete.
you there?
Welcome back to the stream. Yes.
Okay, let's see here. For some reason, I can't hear you
You
right.
were gone.
Yeah, so it's probably on my end. My apologies. I can hear you now. Am I
Yeah.
back? Okay. Um,
Yes, yes. Welcome back. I took over for a minute. Yeah.
uh-huh. Yeah, my apologies. So, you were saying that originally, you were studying at University of Hong Kong,
Yeah.
undergrad in social sciences, correct? And
hmm
a boyfriend, a former boyfriend, was part
Yeah.
of that equation, huh?
Sort of. Yeah. It was
Sort
very
of.
cliche, like you go with a friend for an audition, she didn't get in, and then you end up, getting into the industry. So, yeah, that's my story.
Right. So interesting. And tell me about, your studies at USC and that program and, what it really imparted you with in terms of skills and how it's impacted your career.
Yeah, for sure. It was so when I got into the program, I was told by our professors that that was meant to be like a 2 year program.
Mhm.
And then it was condensed into 10 months. And so what we had during that 10 months course was really, really intense. We just have like a lot of work and we have a lot of like hands-on experience in terms of like running a student media and doing our own projects, like a multimedia project and whatnot. Um, I think when I first got into journalism, I was quite sure, or I was quite determined that I want to do broadcast journalism because I always wanted to. First is I don't really like long form writing. I'm not good at that, to be honest. Um, and uh, and I really like speaking, talking, and just being on camera. I also love doing like video related stuff. So at that point, I realized that I really want to do, um, you know, broadcast journalism, be it TV. I mean, I guess my top priority is doing TV,
Mhm.
and that's really what I'm doing right now. So I'm really happy with what I'm working every day. Um, and I guess like how it impacts me is, I guess it's really funny and interesting. Like a lot of the experience I got when I was studying in the U.S. was. I guess not all of them translate into like really what I do every day at work in Hong Kong because we do have a kind of like a different style or like format of doing news. It's not quite the same way that U.S. media would be doing.
Mm.
Um,
How so?
but there's, um, I guess, for example, one thing that really kind of bugs me a lot is, when I was living in the US, I guess it's not only a US thing, but like in general, journalism should be, like if you're putting out information, you always want to cite somebody. You always want to like attribute like source or something, um, right? And then so that's what
Right.
I learned. Or even if you use like anonymous sources, you would say like, oh, they want to stay anonymous because this and that, right?
Right.
But in Hong Kong, it's a very common thing to use sources say, and not even mentioning like what sources. You can't say police sources, or you won't
Hmm.
say government sources or things like that. But it's just a common thing in Hong Kong, in like Hong Kong's journalism. So sometimes it bugs me a little bit, and I was like, this is not really how we should be doing journalism, but it's a norm here. So I guess I'll just get on with it for the time being. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, that's fascinating. I'd love to chat more specifically about the journalism industry and landscape in Hong Kong. First, I'd love to run your reel and see how that looks here on
Ooh.
our screen. Yeah, it's just about a minute here. I'm going to put our volumes down and then pull that in real quick. It's just about a minute, but it's very cool. Definitely highlights your on-screen presence here.
Oh, I'm
And
gonna cringe.
no, no. Well, you don't have to watch, but you can close your eyes if you want. All right, so there we have it. Very cool reel. I'm gonna pull your volume back up here, Almond. So let's try now. Fantastic. So as you know, viewers out there can tell, Almond Lee has been really at the front lines of covering these protests over the last several years. Sounds like you really, got your start with the umbrella movement. Is that correct in terms of your protest reporting and coverage, Almond?
I guess not really,
I read
because
that on your
when
website, so you can tell me otherwise. And
well, I guess I started like really started developing my interest in journalism when the umbrella movement happened. Back then, I was still a university student. I think I started minoring in journalism at that point when the umbrella movement started. So I wasn't really like I wasn't pursuing a journalism career already. But I guess like at one point, one of my friend and I also have been interviewed for by one of the local media in Hong Kong about the like our participation in the movement in the protest. Back then, I was also like very dedicated in like social movements, joining student led movements and whatnot. Um, so that was really when uh, I got really interested in, like, seeing reporters and, photojournalists and videographers or filmmakers, all of them trying to record what happened to Hong Kong. It's truly one of the most historic moments in Hong Kong's history, I would say, as I think many of people would agree with me. And so I thought, like, maybe I could also be like part of these historic moments, but from a different, with a different identity or a different role in this. Yeah.
Mm. Interesting. So, over the last year or so in particular, a lot has changed in Hong Kong, most notably the national security law. Could you speak a little bit
Sure.
about, your experiences covering that? I'd love to really dig into this issue here as it has dramatically changed the landscape and the
Mhm.
nature of kind of the free press there. Could you tell us a little bit about, your first chronicling that and series of protests?
Yeah, definitely. I actually, so I think I would say I was quite lucky to start my like official career, journalism career, at such a time, especially in Hong Kong. I first started off in the US, but then I came back to Hong Kong and I started working for like more like news media in Hong Kong. I worked for a newspaper, but then like afterwards, I of course like changed it. Like I switched to a broadcast station. That's what I want to do.
Hmm.
Um, and it was there, the protests started to erupt in Hong Kong, and I have a chance to, go out and film a lot of stuff and do, like you said, or shown in my reporter reel. I've gone out to do some like stand up and whatnot, live reporting. And of course, I've done a lot for HEPS as well in the past year.
We've loved
That
that.
was a very remarkable experience for me as well. And so I think I do consider myself truly lucky to have started my career during this unfortunately very tumultuous time in Hong Kong. Um, but that really helps me to grow a lot and a lot faster, I would say. Um, and but like you said, there are a lot of changes happen in the past just 1 year or so. I mean, I started my career like covering the protests, and it was all like, or I guess like stretch a bit far back. Is that when I was at the Umbrella Movement as a student? The relationship between the press and say the police are not so bad. Um, and 5 years later, you see the press and the police. They're more, I wouldn't say clashes, but the very nice and friendly cooperation or like helping each other kind of relationship wasn't really so prominent anymore. And if you look at now, especially with the national security law uh, being enforced in Hong Kong, um, it's even the tension is really just higher than ever. And we were just talking about like a few years time, and I haven't started my career like for long, and I have already like witnessed that change, and I was like, it's really, I don't even have words for that. It's
Mm.
just, a lot happened, and they happened really quickly. Um, and I guess, as a journalist, what particular impact of the national law have done to press freedom or um, freedom of speech, it could be quite detrimental, I would say, especially in terms of freedom of press. I'm not saying that media outlets would start like censoring themselves, but I think at least that at least when I was doing some reporting or like at my office, we would all be like more careful in terms of fact checking stuff or because it could be a legal problem for us. And of course, like as a broadcast company or as a media company, Like it's still a company, it's still a business, and you don't want to get into like legal troubles and whatnot. Um, so, like I said, I wouldn't say that media started to like censor themselves, but definitely a lot of us are being like more careful as to how to say a certain phrase, or for example, in Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government has shortly after they implemented the national security law, they said one of the very prominent or popular protest slogan that is "Liberate Hong Kong." Sorry, yes, "Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of Our Time." A very popular slogans in the protests. The government ruled that that is not okay. It could be seditious or something like that. But of course, they would say they said, oh, it's okay if you're reporting that someone chanted this slogan, then you're fine.
Mm.
But there's just really this fine line there, and you never know how the authority would respond, right? And what if they said
Right.
that, well, you haven't done your reporting fair enough, and you are trying to like promote this independence or certain political belief? Could that get us into trouble? So there are these like worries and concerns in our just like daily operation and reporting. So for sure, like I said, I would say that's quite detrimental, because you're supposed to like report like freely, but now you have like a lot more concerns.
It seems like there's just increased anxiety in the newsrooms there. From the World Press Freedom Index, it looks like Hong Kong has dropped down 7 spots to number 80 on the list.
We've been dropping.
Yeah, it certainly appears that way. Looking at the data here, you know, obviously some very high profile incidents as well. The Apple Daily's newsroom being
Mhm.
raided, Jimmy Lai being arrested. What did those really symbolize, those events there, for Hong Kongers and for Hong Kongers working in news?
Um, it's it's tough, and especially like you mentioned, I would really want to highlight the Apple Daily raid and the arrest of Jimmy Lai. Um, I was just sitting in the office with my colleagues, and we're talking about it, and we're like, what if that happened to our newsroom?
Mm.
What would we do? And it's quite a scary thing, I would say. You thought you're just reporting news, reporting facts, you're covering stories, and all of a sudden, a bunch of like law enforcement come into march into your office and be like, or like going through your stuff and making arresting your boss. It's really quite scary. Uh, but I guess like the mentality and the vibe here is that the bigger the oppression, um, the more people would want to know about the truth, or the more journalists would want to report. So I would say, I mean, that's the vibe that I'm sensing among the journalism circle, and also just there are still a lot of people like who. I mean, of course, like right after the Apple Daily raid, there are a lot of people like buying shares of the Apple Daily to show their support. They subscribe to their like digital access, to have digital access to their stories. They are buying like the physical newspapers. Of course, we know that prints are like it's getting less and less because of the digital and online element of journalism, right? But they're still like buying the newspapers every day. People are taking out ads to support the newspaper, the tabloid. So to me, it's I feel like I said, the bigger the suppression is, the more people want to know, and we're just going to keep doing it and keep reporting. Yeah.
Yeah, boy. I mean, I want to highlight a joint statement from Reporters Without Borders and Committee to Protect Journalists, issued in August, along with a number of other signatories, Freedom House, etc. Expressing their deep concern about the status of press freedom in Hong Kong. More recently, there's been a series of arrests and charges against a Swiss photographer. Most recently, it sounds like 12. Is it? Could you tell us the latest headline that you were just mentioning is trending there regarding
Mm.
freedom of speech?
Yeah, for sure. So, like Lucia said, a lot of the attention have been brought to the 12 Hong Kongers who are now being detained on the mainland. Um, they were arrested by mainland authorities back in August. Yeah, end of August, I believe. Yeah.
And are those
Um,
activists, protesters, journalists? Tell us a little bit more about
yeah,
them.
they're presumed to be protesters or activists.
Uh-huh.
They almost all of them have been arrested in Hong Kong for like protest related charges. One of them, according to the government, I forgot whether that's a he or she, but that person was not arrested, but
Mhm.
he or she was a wanted person, apparently, according to the Hong Kong government. Also, like for the protests or what he or she has done in the protests. Um, and so yeah, they were back in like end of August. They were arrested by mainland authorities for allegedly trying to cross the border illegally. And reports were saying that they were trying to flee from Hong Kong via water transport, basically like speedboats, from Hong Kong to Taiwan. They want to flee to Taiwan.
Mhm.
Um, that's the reports out there saying that was their intention, and they were intercepted by mainland authorities in mainland waters, and that's why they have been detained on the mainland rather than in Hong Kong. Um, and it's been almost 50 days now since they've been detained there, and their families have been saying that they were not able to contact them. There were no like really news from them as to like what their situation is, or like at what stage their cases are right now. They were the lawyers that their family appointed were turned away by mainland authorities and said that they've already picked like government um, lawyers from the government lists, basically. Um, and so a lot of people are really like worried and concerned about the 12. Um, and I guess one of the reasons being um, that the whole like the whole year long anti-government protest was started by this extradition bill. People, went out to the street, took to the street because they don't want this extradition bill.
Mhm.
They don't want what they call rendition to China. Um, they don't want to say anything that would upset the Chinese government, and they would risk being sent to China. Not sure if they would get fair trial, because obviously China has been notorious of not having fair trial, and their conviction rate is like 99% conviction rate. So that's of course like it's a scary thing for a lot of people, and that is the whole reason why like people at first took to the street to oppose this extradition bill. Now the extradition bill has been withdrawn, but you see that um, that could still happen, and that is exactly why people are so fearful at the very beginning.
Right. So sounds like, there's a lot going on there. What's the mood, among uh, I guess people on the metro or people, in the streets here? Is there, a palpable sense that something has changed after this national security law?
Yeah, I would say so. I guess one of the most like obvious signs is that definitely we have fewer protests on the streets. There are still some going on, or like sporadically. We don't have like a large scale rally or protest or public assemblies. Um, I mean, of course, like COVID being one of the reasons, but Uh, I guess the other obvious signs is that I don't know if people are aware, but we do have this sort of like yellow economy going on in Hong Kong. So basically,
What does
if
that
you've been
mean?
following, yeah. So basically, if you if anyone who have been following the Hong Kong movement, there are basically two camps now, divided
Mhm.
by color. So we have the Camp Yellow and Camp Blue. And Camp Blue, it's the pro-government, pro-establishment people, and the Camp Yellow is those who support the protests, who support the social movement, or rather anti-government or anti-Beijing, whatever you want to call it. Um, so we have this two camps of people, and those pro-democracy people, they would support this so-called yellow economy. So it's basically, going to restaurants who have voiced support for the protest, or support the cause of the social movement and things like that. So they kind of like create this whole like pro democracy ecosystem, or like business sort of ecosystem in place in Hong Kong. Um, so so like we kind of have this like yellow economy zone, and a lot of the times people, or like those, for example, restaurants or shops, they would put out posters or signs, or what we have, the so-called Lenin walls. That is basically a wall with a lot of post-its with you know slogans, or wordings that support the protesters or support the social movement. Um, right after the national security law, even before the national security law was officially implemented, when the government was just touting the idea, we've already seen a lot of those like shops taken down their, the Lenin Wall, or take down, statue or posters that would indicate that they are a yellow shop. Um, so that's one of the very obvious signs that we're seeing.
It sounds like people are, yeah, legitimately concerned about, the implications of this national security law. How it will be applied is still unclear. This red line, as you mentioned, is very vague, it seems.
Yeah, yeah, we do have. We already have people who have been arrested and now being charged, or prosecuted rather, under the national security law. We do have cases related to the new law, but of course, like the judicial proceeding is still going on, and it's really difficult to foresee the outcome. Um, People in Hong Kong, or at least those in the legal sector, they tend to believe that there's still like judicial independence in Hong Kong. So it's not like, if Beijing wants to, or the Hong Kong government wants to arrest this person, and charge him or her with the national security law, the court would follow suit, or would follow the order rather. Um, but yeah, like I said, the court proceeding is still going on, so we'll just have to wait and see. But definitely, even the first arrest, when the first arrest was made, it was, it stirs commotion for sure in Hong Kong.
Certainly. What can we as an international community collectively do to, reach out or support journalists or freedom of speech, or of the press? Are there any ways, that you hope the international community can, voice their support, or provide some type of, material, uh, you know, help?
Um, I guess really, as a journalist, I think really coverage is a very key part, for sure. I mean, Hong Kong media is definitely doing our part, but like I guess also, like, because being in the industry, kind of, what protests would draw the attention of international media, which protests would not, because of, the lack of a certain elements or something like that, or like, if the turnout of that rally was just too small, media outlets probably, wouldn't even care to cover it. So I guess just really, um, keep the news in a buzz, really, and also, it's not really on the pro democracy movements that I'm highlighting, but just looking at, as fellow journalists, I guess, is really paying attention to the issue of freedom of press, because this could happen to not only Hong Kong. I mean, it's not just because Hong Kong is a Chinese territory, but as China grows into this bigger power, world power, it could affect any journalist. I mean, American journalists were also kicked out, or like face difficulty working in China.
Mhm.
So it's not really just about Hong Kong, and I guess like really keeping the topic, paying attention to the topic of like freedom of press, is a really important thing, because we are the fourth pillar. We're supposed to keep the government and those in powers in checks, and I think without that, it's really going to hurt the society really a lot.
Certainly a big concern. There's been a dearth of reporting in the U.S. Of the Hong Kong situation in the last month with our election cycle in a frenzy. It's just, hard, I think, for the average American, at least, to stay up to date with all these things when the press is
Yeah, for sure.
not covering them in particular, and timing wise, there's been speculation that, amidst the pandemic, it was the perfect moment for Beijing to, implement this law. And, do you feel like there's an opportunity being seized here by Beijing and the CCP, timing wise? Is this a quicker, crackdown than was expected, in many ways?
Um, I I don't really have an answer whether, like, because of the pandemic, it's a more convenient time, or like Hong Kong is at its weaker spot, or something like that, and that makes it kind of like easier for Beijing to implement the national security law. But I guess one thing that I could pinpoint is that, um, during the pandemic, um, there certainly is a lot. Beijing has put in a lot of effort, in terms of, like, for example, sending medical experts to Hong Kong to help with, testing capacity, to do like virus testing. We've got a lot of like resources, and Beijing, the Chinese government also promised us, when there's a vaccine, then Hong Kong would definitely get help from the central government, and things like that. Um, so I would say, I guess I don't want to put it in a very like definitive term, but the pandemic, in some sense, could also like help Beijing to sort of um, paint a new narrative, or sort of like, uh, yeah, I guess like paint a new narrative. Like, rather than, oh, we're trying to like suppress Hong Kong's freedom of speech, or freedom of expression, or freedom of assemblies. It's more like, a testimony of how the central government, the Chinese Communist Party, is a very strong backing of Hong Kong. It's definitely a lot of, yeah, you could definitely feel that, just as a general public, for sure, that there's a spin of such.
Mm. Well, I'd like to address any questions from the audience. If you have a question for Almond, please, chime in here before we wrap up. Oh, Perry says, what are you talking about? So we are talking about press freedom in Hong Kong. If you're just tuning in, my name is Peter Bittner. I'm the host of Journalism Under Fire. We have with us today Almond Lee from Hong Kong, a freelance reporter for Reuters, HAPS, and other news outlets. She's been speaking with us about the impacts of the national security law on the freedom of press in Hong Kong and other political happenings. So feel free to chime in here. I see a couple questions from the audience. Lucia says, what would you say is your favorite part of being a journalist? So that's a fun one.
I think I really like every bit of it. Whether that's on camera or behind the camera when I was just filming stuff. I felt like it's an honor if I could deliver the accurate information to the public, and that's for like hard news story. And I also get to work on some like softer, like featurey story, and I felt like when I was able to like present that, present a story of another person to the outside world, I think that's a really important, interesting thing that I would be really grateful for. Yeah, that I'm able to do it. Oops, you mute yourself, Pete.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We have another question from the audience here. Chewy Barker from Twitter says, what do you both feel about Periscope? Someone I used to watch has disappeared from it. I'm not sure who exactly he's referring to there, but, I'm interested in live streaming as a medium here. I, in full transparency, work for HAPS. I'm, one of the journalistic and editorial content managers here. We've worked with journalists, including Almond, all over the world to source live stream reporting, broadcast to our HAPS branded channels, as well as social media accounts of the journalists here. I see a deep power in being able to have these live reports that anyone can now take part in. We also stream to Periscope as part of HAPS News here. For those of you just joining us, we are talking about press freedom in Hong Kong and taking a question from the audience about Periscope and live streaming. Alma, do you have any thoughts about live streaming as a medium? You've worked in video for years now.
I guess I couldn't really answer Periscope because I don't have Periscope. I know, like, we've been streamed, like our live stream get onto Periscope, but I personally don't really use Periscope, so I couldn't take that on. But the live streaming, I guess really, I attended a forum, which was featuring a lot of like veteran journalists in Hong Kong, and there was one question that I've asked one of the speakers is that when people are live streaming, a lot of people would say, live streaming, so there's no like editing. Basically, everything is like laid before your eyes, right? So it must be true. Can we say that, or like, can we say live streaming equals to having the truth there? And I think the answers that I've got from the speaker was, I think it was like quite important, and also it's good to note that when a journalist is live streaming, for sure there'll still be, your phone camera is only like facing one side. What happened behind you, you won't be able to film it. So there will never be like a complete truth out there, or like a full picture. But I do agree that, when you're live streaming, there is less possibility that you would be able to, like take out things to favor a certain person or favor a certain party or side. But yeah, I mean, live streaming has been like dominating, especially social media right now. A lot of like news media outlets, they are, using Facebook Live or like YouTube or like Instagram Live, or in the US, maybe Snapchat and things like that. So I guess live streaming it has its good and bad.
Certainly, yeah, a good overview of the pros and cons. Another question here from Haunted at Birth. Do you think that your live stream helps your cause, and what's your cause? Another question about, live streaming and covering breaking news. Could you speak a little bit about the importance of live streaming in the local media environment, starting with the umbrella movement? I think that was probably a moment where the world's eyes really turned to Hong Kong, and often through the lens of activists or journalists out there on the street live, with their phones.
For sure. I think I wouldn't say like there's a particular cause in doing live streams, but certainly one of those would be you want to bring the news to, or you want to bring the information to the public at the very first instant. And because of this technological change, uh, live streaming have taken a very important place in the news cycle. Back then, I mean, I was really still a kid when we're all about like watching TV news, at 7 p.m. or something like that, when you're like gathering at the dinner table with your family and you would be like watching the evening news or something like that. And I guess one ironic thing is that when we say news, it's not really new. Like in the past, at least, it's always something that has already happened, and so you report on that. But with live streaming, you could really bring the audience, right to where you are, and let them see through your lens, what is actually happening. And I guess without, like I said, with live streaming, it's difficult for you to do edits. Like right at the moment, you can't really edit stuff. You can't really edit footage. You can't edit sound bites, right? And I think with that, I guess that kind of like authenticity comes with live streaming. Is there's no editing, so people just interpret things in their own way, or if they see police misconduct, that's police misconduct. If you see a protesters beating up some other guy, that's what you see. And it's difficult for the journalists to edit out some parts or give you like a incomplete picture, so to speak, in a large sense.
Mm. Well said. Another question from the audience here. Do you believe that big tech/social media firms will continue to provide outlets for journalists despite political pressures from governments such as China and Russia? So that's certainly interesting. In the Hong Kong social media space, what are your thoughts on that in particular, Almond?
I think in Hong Kong, it's actually less. I would say most of the so-called like social media, like distribution of news is mostly on Facebook, and maybe on Instagram. But Instagram is more like you have the picture in the post, but it's not. I don't think journalists in Hong Kong do so much on like Instagram Live. But we do take like our live stream to like broadcasts on Facebook too, like for at least for most of the like major news outlets or digital media in Hong Kong. And I think really, I would say the big tech or social media firms, rather than providing an outlet, I think it's worth discussing whether, I guess, worth discussing their role in terms of promoting journalism and also eradicating fake news, or I should say misinformation rather. There's really no fake news, misinformation, I guess. So And honestly, even without social media, for sure, like social media is one like major source people get news from nowadays. But even without social media, if people really are determined to get the information, they can still, you can either download the news apps, or just Google it or something like that. You don't have to stick to Facebook to get the notification of what happened and where, right? And so I guess the really bigger question here is how could social media help um, with really promoting like trustworthy journalism and eradicating misinformation in this era, I would say.
Well said. Another comment here. Give me more information. You sound like the other media, dragging the awesome police just doing their job. So that's certainly an interesting comment, right? There's obviously a need for uh, peace and restoring order in the streets. I certainly understand that. I'm not really taking a side here in terms of, yeah, the police versus protesters dynamic. We're more interested in covering how the media environment has changed, right, and is portraying these events using social media and live streaming as a tool here. So, I'm really grateful for the question here. Have utmost respect for police. They have a very tough job. It's obviously vital to prevent looting, burning. I mean, I'm not condoning that in any way here, but the reality is there's certainly a real crackdown on free speech happening in Hong Kong now, particularly after this June 30th national security law has been passed, and the effects are stifling, on social media, in newsrooms. It's a big issue. I've really enjoyed talking with Almond here today. It looks like she just dropped off here. Want to thank everyone in the comments and in the audience here for their questions. Are there any others here? Give just a few seconds in case anyone else has a burning question. Great. Otherwise, I'm not sure, if Almond's having trouble rejoining here. So I will thank her for her time. Almond, really a pleasure having you here with us. If you have any additional comments or questions, feel free to comment on the link here to the external platforms. So, for example, Twitter, Facebook, all these places where the HAPS stream is simultaneously going out to. If you comment on those, we'll see those. You can also, follow us on HAPS and visit and have more direct and often quicker feed there. Thank you for joining us, though. It's really, fantastic to have people participating in the broadcast and asking questions. Thank you for all the viewers out there, and hope you'll tune in next time to Journalism Under Fire. I'm your host, Peter Bittner. I hope you all have a great weekend.